Asteroid of fear.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. Today we have Crystal DeSantis. She's a licensed marriage and family counselor, and she has a book called Strong, a relationship field guide for the modern man. And we're going to talk about relationships and how the role of masculinity and kind of what it means to be a man, how it's changed. I'm 48, and it's changed quite a bit from the time I was 18, even 16 when I graduated high school a year early, joined the Navy at 17, and you think you're on your way to becoming a man, but it's been a wild journey and everything has changed, from computers to this podcasting, being able to Zoom. And so being a man has evolved the same way. So how's it going today?
Good. I am in Austin, Texas, and it is, it's still pretty hot.
I'm in Tyler. I'm in East Texas,
Okay.
and I
Okay,
live I
great.
lived there for 8 years in Austin. So yeah,
Yeah.
I know what it's
Yeah.
like.
And you're in this area of Texas, so you also know the false fall, how it was kind of cool last week, and it was like, oh my gosh, is it going to be fall? Nope, nope.
My wife
Psych.
too. When we were down there for 8 years and we moved further north, it's like 4 hours north, and she goes, the first summer, she's like, I thought it was supposed to be cooler because we're north. I go, no, it actually is pretty hot. Like, and
Yeah,
Dallas gets really hot, but
so much.
Austin, Dallas, East Texas, like they're all different, but Texas
Mhm.
kind of has its own weather where, it's similar in that it's really hot, but whether it's a
Mhm.
hot, humid, a dry, or like Dallas, there's just so much concrete. It's a different
Yes.
city hot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, there are worse places. I've lived here now since, let's see, 2013. Um, so
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen the city change a lot as well.
We left
So
in 2015, so we were there
okay,
2009 to 2015. No, 2006 to 2015.
nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was down there last time I was down there, I did a podcast in Austin in the summer, like
Mhm.
Mayish, and that was the
Mhm.
last time I was down there. And I did the interview in Northwest Austin, which is funny because where we started out. And then I stayed all the way in South Austin, like Ben White, South First
Yeah.
Street.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's just grown. It's like there's
So
just stuff
much.
everywhere.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And I know, the population has changed about 400,000 or more.
Yes, absolutely. I
It
mean, it
was.
really, yeah. But I think that kind of, I mean, just speaking to the theme of what you're saying, I mean, the world has changed so fast, so quick. I mean, like in so many different ways.
Hmm.
Just, I mean, gosh, yeah, like you said, even in our like, so even in the time that I've lived in Austin, I've seen the city change. Obviously, in our lifetime, since high school, since college, for us, like the world has changed. Obviously, talking about like what our grandparents and our parents have experienced, the level of change. I mean, exponential.
Yeah.
Um,
And we and
almost.
realizing that we get a lot of our programming from
Mhm.
that. And I feel, I don't know, as a Gen Xer, I kind of feel I don't know, I feel how do you explain it? Like a curse breaker, a generational trauma breaker,
Yeah.
that you want to take, whether it's your family name, genetics, everything that's kind of been passed down or put on us and
Hmm.
shift it differently. So like the family dynamic, what if it whether it's addiction or whatever is
Hmm.
not staying in the family, that it finally
Hmm.
gets out
Yeah.
and goes away. But how did you get into this field? Where'd you grow up? Give us, and what did you think you were going to do? And then how did you get into this? And then we'll get into, what inspired you to write the book and all
Yeah.
these other topics. But yeah,
Absolutely.
give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. So I actually grew up in Japan. I grew up overseas. My dad is American, but he moved overseas, when he was young and met my mom, who is Asian. And so we just ended up, I grew up in Asia. I did grow up speaking English and, doing
Yeah, I was stationed in
international
Japan.
school. Yeah, it's fun.
I
My
loved it.
husband, yeah, my husband actually was also stationed in Japan when he was like 19 years old. And this summer we actually got a chance to go back and see the base where he was
Yeah,
stationed.
I had my
Um,
19th birthday in Japan.
oh my gosh, yeah. So I mean, it's just anyway. So I love Japan. Japan is a great place, but culturally incredibly different than
Yeah.
America.
Oh yeah.
Um, so honestly, like growing up in Japan and going to international school, like I always knew that one day I would eventually move back to the States because this is where my first language is English, and um, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do because I didn't know what the options were.
Hmm.
Growing up in such a different culture, um, and so yeah, actually, when I went to college, I actually majored in communications because it was just kind of a broad. I have some journalists in my family, so I was like, oh, that sounds cool. Um, and so I majored in communications, and I actually didn't get into being a therapist until I actually met my husband on a dating app and realized I
That
had
drove you
no
to therapy.
relationship. It did. It's serious. Like I had no relationship skills. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna ruin this. This is gonna be bad. And so I went to therapy, and my therapist was a marriage and family therapist because I'm like help, love, life,
Yeah,
relationships. And so I ended up going to a marriage and family therapist, and then I was like, oh my gosh, you can learn how to do this. So I kept learning. I started going to school for it myself and eventually got my master's, started my practice, and then wrote my book. So it really is kind of a me story
that
of
is awesome. And like for context for people listening who've never been to Japan, I mean, I was there in the mid 90s
mm,
and how life has changed and the world has changed since then.
yeah.
But, I could even imagine when I was there in the 90s, I'm from a small town in Texas and very kind of religious, very old school, conservative, old
Mm-hmm,
money,
mm-hmm,
Southern. And, you know, I remember in Japan, like I was never really around couples. One of my E5s was married to a Japanese woman and lived off base. But, during my time there, I could just imagine the way the culture was and kind of, we took an intercultural relations class when we got there, and you have to learn about the culture and what's appropriate
mm-hmm,
and what's not. It was just very different even from
mm-hmm.
American standards in the 90s. I mean, in
Totally.
terms of like, the things I enjoyed about it was kind of the collective and, you could fall asleep at the train station. Nobody was going to mess with you. Or if you dropped your wallet, somebody's probably going to turn it in. And that was
Mm-hmm,
still a far departure of what it was, in the States in the
mm-hmm.
90s because there was kind of like it was Bloods and Crips and Dr.
Yeah.
Dre and Snoop Dogg. So
Mm-hmm.
very different time. But, I could imagine growing up around that, how that shaped maybe how you viewed marriage and relationships, but also with maybe a white father it's
Yeah.
different because you're marrying kind of two cultures versus, but I'm sure you were around people that were, your friends, or maybe people that were Asian, strictly Asian household,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
what the family dynamics, relationship dynamics were like. And
Yeah.
is that what made maybe kind of relationship and dating experience difficult for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there is really, I mean, at least again, like, it's interesting because as you were speaking, one thing that was really coming up for me is, in some ways, which again, I'm not a cultural expert or anything, but in some ways, growing up in Japan is almost like what the image is of growing up in like 1950s America,
Yes,
right?
that's what I
It's
was
like
thinking.
yeah, very traditional, like
Yeah.
fathers worked, mothers stay home. If you, as a woman, got married, the expectation was that you would leave the workforce, You didn't see pregnant women working, like this
Right.
was not a thing. And then once you had children, you stayed home. And so, and even like with the Japanese business culture, like it's all like it's very work heavy,
Mm-hmm.
men go to work and they don't talk about their families. Like I remember my dad, just remarking as the difference from American culture to working in Japanese culture. He's like, I've never met any of my colleagues' wives, and I've worked with them for, whereas in America, it's like, eventually, of course, you're
Yeah.
going to meet, your colleague's wife. They're going to drop by the office, but in Japan, there's much more of that clear divide, um, of like there's home and there's work,
Do you
and
think that's
there's
better for relationships or worse?
Oh, no. I mean, like, and it's so interesting because, like, I don't know if you've, kept your a finger on the pulse of like the Asian, like what's going on in Japan right now, like the lowest birth rate,
Yeah.
like, and like people really not, and the government's kind of like, what do we do, right? Is that those roles work when those are people's only options. Once people have more options, it's like, well, why would I do that? Like, what if I want both? Like, and if I
Yeah.
choose a career, then I can't have a family. And if I choose my family, I can't have a career. Like these seem really binary,
Yeah.
and so that's really what I see as the limitations of that. Like in some ways, having these very distinct roles make for a smooth running society, but it doesn't make for a very like individually fulfilling society necessarily.
Are people more or less fulfilled there? In your opinion, having lived there when you were there as an observationist, maybe as a young person, knowing what you know now, would you think they were fulfilled or was it different? Because I was thinking freedom and choice, people love choices. That's what they love
Yes.
about freedom.
I was just gonna say, I mean, that's really the promise of America, right? Is that
Yeah.
like you can be anything, you can be anybody. And so I think that was something that when I, again, growing up in Japan, that was always kind of a element in the back of my mind is that like I don't fit here, right? Because I
Mm.
am a third culture kid, I'm a mix. So like there is no distinct role for me here. Right. And so I would have to go live in America because like I don't fit into one of these distinct roles here. Right.
Mm.
Um, and so that is that's the beauty of America, right? Is there's freedom, there's
Yeah.
choice. You get to decide what you want to do and who you want to be. If you want to be a stay-at-home mom, you can be a stay-at-home mom. If you want to be a
Hmm.
working mom, you can be a working mom. You could, do whatever. And so that's also where I see of,
Could even be
you
the
know,
president.
yeah, exactly.
It's
Right.
great. Yeah. I mean,
Um, and so that's really what I see as like, again, not saying one culture is better than the other. I'm sure there's like fulfilled people and non-fulfilled
yeah.
people in every culture. But again, when it comes to what I know also about like people and the psychology of like purpose and choice, um, people having freedoms, I mean, it's something that Americans have, fought for since day one.
Do they have therapists in Japan?
um, it's not really a thing. No.
I was kind of wondering about that. And,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking of, we talk about freedom, choice, and we talk about kind of like unpacking, through conversation. And, it took me a little bit of time to understand that what I didn't like about having a corporate thing and what I like about what I do now was the freedom, but the freedom boils down to choices, but the choices are they kind of boil down to flexibility and the ability of like my daughter was sick and I had to take her to the doctor this week and stay
Mhm.
home with her, but I still did some podcasting, still worked out, but I could choose when and where because I
Mhm.
wasn't kind of configured to a box. And so it kind of took me to that. And as we were discussing this and talking about like smooth running societies and fulfillment, I was like, is therapy a normal thing in Japan? Is that something that they do? And if so, why or why not? Is it a cultural thing or are they
It very
afraid what would
much,
happen if people started unpacking everything?
well, again, like I can't speak to, I was a child when I lived
Right.
there, right? Um, But really, again, I'm just kind of comparing it to maybe like the 1950s America, where it's like, yes, there is mental health help, but it is very much from a medical perspective, right? Like there are people
Right.
with schizophrenia, there are people with severe depression, there are people with, but maybe it's more treated like the medical model as opposed to
Talk
more
therapy.
relational, yeah,
Hmm.
which is more of the American, or there is the option of that here, right? And it's, again, the goal here is to make it less stigmatized, so it's not just always about mental illness, but more about mental health, right?
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of something I had thought about and a little while back. I don't know about if it was a post or I said it on a podcast that, I would like for mental health to come to a place when people think of it. It's not in a
Mm-hmm.
negative connotation, but kind of
Mm-hmm.
like you would your physical fitness,
Totally.
of like saying like if you say, well, what do you do? Oh, I do CrossFit or I do jujitsu,
Mm-hmm.
would almost be like, oh, I do better help, or I have a person who's
Mm-hmm.
a therapist that I go see in person once a week, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is what I do to keep myself or try to keep myself the best version of myself,
Totally. Totally.
and that it's looked at as more of a positive thing, the same way we do
Absolutely.
exercise, because,
Yeah.
you know, we we have a we have a certain respect for people who are fit,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you've ever tried to get fit, because we
Mm-hmm.
know the work that is required to get there. And if you
Absolutely.
ever start unpacking your own stuff and
Mm-hmm.
you see somebody who's well adjusted, who reacts well in certain situations under pressure, they don't lose their cool, you kind of respect and admire that the same way. But you have to know that that person has probably done some sort of work, mental health
Mm-hmm.
work behind the scenes to get
Absolutely.
to that place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I mean, that is part of the reason why I call my practice strong and I wrote my book strong, is like, I want to, I want one day, because, even thinking about going to the gym, right?
Mhm.
Again, maybe in the 1950s, they just started being like, hey, working out is a thing, like Jack LaLanne, right? And then it wasn't until like, Arnold and the bodybuilders, and they
Right.
started really normalizing it. So even that is kind of a relatively new thing. People didn't go to the gym; they were just more active, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of different ways. And and yet now it's like, when you say, hey, I'm going to hit the gym, people aren't like, oh my gosh, are you okay, like, are
Are you
you
one
you
of
know
those people?
yeah. It's like, no, yeah, sure, that makes total sense, like it's just part of life, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's also part of the adaptation of, like, yeah, maybe back in the day people had healthier relationships in like with their communities, or they had more community support, and now, that's not really a reality. So rather than, thinking that going to a therapist is something like, oh gosh, this is, it's some trend. It's like, maybe it's also the replacement of, we don't have community elders anymore. We don't have community circles. We don't have, I mean, sure, certain communities do, but, that way of like being where, maybe I want to go talk to my grandfather. I'm having a bad day, or, my
Yeah.
girlfriend just, is upset at me. I'm going to go, talk to a grandparent or a trusted elder. Um, like that's just not really a thing anymore,
Well,
right?
there's something about like we're overly connected. We're connected to a point that's absurd that allows, I have podcasts with people who in New Zealand and Australia,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but it feels different. There's something
totally.
different, and I don't know what it is. If it, maybe
Well,
like when you said go talk to an elder, I thought about the time and effort that it takes, and that you were probably gonna get, sit down on the porch or in the rocking chair or on the couch and let's
mm-hmm.
discuss this and think through it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if it's the slower pace and we've
Mm. Oh yeah,
sped up our pace so much. I mean, we
totally,
go from meeting to
totally.
meeting, podcast to email to
Mm-hmm.
this, we're communicating in so many different ways as opposed to maybe
Mm-hmm.
just one method. I've done email today,
Absolutely.
Zoom, texted,
Oh my
everything.
gosh. Yeah. I mean, there's, studies about that too. I mean, just kind of switching gears a little bit, like talking about the loneliness epidemic, right? It's like, sure, you might have 795 friends on Facebook, but, what they showed in the study was like, most people don't have somebody, especially men, that would pick them up at the airport, you know, or
Yeah.
bring them soup when they're sick. Right. And so that's also where, again, like the outsourcing, like you said, we are so much more quote unquote connected, but maybe the quality of those connections have changed, right? Because it's like, yeah, I could pick you up from the airport, but that's going to be like 30 minutes driving to the airport, waiting around, then driving back. Can you just take an Uber? Right. Like, or like that's going to require me to like take a whole afternoon off, to bring you soup and make soup, and like can't you just postmates it, right? Like can't you just Uber Eats? And so that's really where it is like the world has gotten faster, people have deprioritized relationships, and and yet we're so much more connected, but it's like the quantity versus quality um,
Yeah,
has
well,
changed.
because you would never think of, I think of before Facebook, like living in Florida away from my parents, if I were
Mhm.
sick or something, if I had friends, be guy or girls that I
Mhm.
worked with who would bring me stuff or check on me. And I try to
Mhm.
think if I had that, who
Mhm.
was it? Because how did you know them? We weren't friends anywhere on an app.
Yeah.
Um, and I go, of course they have to bring it to you and check on you because there is no option for Uber.
Yeah.
Now,
Mhm.
is it this convenient thing? Because, when you talk about, let's say, freedom even, or you want to make more money,
Mhm.
and part of money is freedom. Freedom is to buy back your time for things you don't have to
Mhm.
do. So instead of going to check on you, I could send an Uber or DoorDash you something because
Yeah.
that would be too much for me. Um, or I could, and so you think of that and you're like, okay, if you look at it like, well, I can buy back my time or I can do it. Now I can help somebody from
Mhm.
afar. I don't even have to do that because I've got all these
Mhm.
meetings that could be great. But
Yeah.
also you're able to use it as a way out
Totally.
in,
Totally.
in essence.
Yeah. And I think that's really, again, like, life has sped up so much, right? Ever since, I guess I don't know where we can go back to, but definitely with the internet, right? It's like life has sped up so much that, and this is honestly what I see with couples is the biggest factor is protecting your time, protecting your presence with each other from all of the things that are pulling you away, right? Because it's like, yeah, sure, like I remember when I first started dating my husband, he would like come to my office and bring me a smoothie, you know,
Hmm.
and like that was something that was so, because it was a whole moment, right? And same thing if he was working and I like we didn't live together, so if I made some dinner and I would drive and drop it off at, and so like these little things that you know you have to really prioritize the relationship in order to make that happen, right? It's like it's not just enough to be like, yeah, I could totally order you a juice land right now and like it could
Right.
be at your desk in
Yeah.
12 minutes or less, but like my presence along with that is part of the gift, right?
Well, and it makes me think of kind of what's required from as men, because it's
Mhm.
not just you can go to work like 1950s America or maybe
Uh-huh.
modern Japan.
Yeah.
Women want, it's the presence,
The
the
presence,
the
yeah.
engagement.
Right. Because that's really at the end of the day, like you talk about, like, what are we buying back with money, right? Is time. And what is the one thing that can't be outsourced? And this is really what it all boils down to is like, at the end of the day, are you replaceable in your relationship? Or is there something that you bring to this relationship that only you can? And at the end of the day, what it often boils down to is your presence, right? It's like, sure, you can hire somebody to mow the lawn. Sure, you can hire somebody to, do the
Yeah.
homework with the kids. Sure, you can hire somebody to clean the house, to make the dinner. But so then, like, what do we need each other for at the end of the day? It's the presence, it's the connection, it's that, the one thing that actually can't be replaced, right? Or outsourced.
Man. Yeah, I had I had a thought and lost it, but it was kind of around it was around that with what do we need? Kind of oh, that's what it was. I kind of relay it back to I remember thinking of this once because I've been with my wife 18 years. We've been married about 11, 12-ish, somewhere in there. Um, but in things change, you have kids, responsibilities grow, and it's difficult. And, yes, we argue, we get upset with each other, all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
But, I think about like I sometimes I'm like, let's take a few steps back and, try to remember when all the things you used to do, all the things you would rearrange, all the late night hours, lack of sleep, everything you did because spending the time with the person was the prize. It wasn't about this, it wasn't about that. You were doing, rearranging stuff to make the time. And it didn't matter what you were doing because if you're married or you've ever been in love with someone, you know that it's not about what you're doing or where you are. You could be laying in the bed of a pickup truck looking at the stars just as comfortable
Mhm.
as you could be in a Marriott somewhere.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and some things are made more special, like let's say you're at the Eiffel Tower or something, but that's made by the presence of each other. But there was
Totally.
that point where it's like the person and the time together, that connection, that was the
Mhm.
prize. And once you get into a relationship, you start having kids and life starts happening around you.
Mhm.
That kind of gets forgotten.
Yeah. And that's really, like that's like kind of in the very, very beginning of my book of I talk about like, if you don't nurture the connection, function takes over. And life is full of functional aspects, right? Being an adult,
Mhm.
cooking, cleaning, washing the dishes, getting the kids to school, like all of those things will take over your life. But at the end of the day, people are always going to cherish connection and presence, right? So like I don't know that necessarily people have changed that much from the whatever 1950s or the early 90s or whatever, where at the end of the day we get into relationships not just to have somebody like there are too many couples that are like we just feel like roommates. And so that's the thing is like just doing life with somebody is not enough. It's being present in that life with somebody, being connected to that somebody as you go through life. That really matters. And unfortunately, that's the thing that I always see that, life or, the busyness of our modern world fights and couples have
Mhm.
to fight for that, like being present with each other, staying connected with each other, because there are so many more distractions these days. There are so many more ways to shortcut what feels like connection. Like, yeah, I sent you a
Yeah.
card today. It's on an automatic reminder, but whatever. Um, and so that's something that I don't know that that's changed because that's really what I see when couples come in and they're like, we just don't feel connected anymore. Or we feel like roommates, or the only conversations we have now are about the kids. And because there's still that longing there of like, I miss the person that I used to be connected to. And I want that back, but we don't know how because our lives are so busy. We don't prioritize our time, you know, especially like you said for married couples with children. It's like the priority of the couple just falls to the bottom of the to-do list,
Yeah.
right? And that's just not sustainable. And so part of the work I do is there's a great quote, and I can't remember who said it right now, but it's basically like the best gift a father can give his children is to love their mother, right? And so that's basically like at the end of the day, like you could be doing all the stuff of parenting and like, gosh,
Mhm.
well, we got to get the kids enrolled in this and we got to get their school uniforms and we got to, and it's like, yes, yes, yes. And what they will take away for the rest of their lives is how the two of you interacted, what they saw as the model of a healthy relationship, how they saw you love and treat each other, how you communicated, how you resolved conflict. Those are going to be the skills that when it comes to
Yeah.
healthy relationships for them, that's what they're going to take away.
Yeah, it's Because it's almost like, the kid's the priority, like, especially you get them off to school, and sometimes one can do it, sometimes it takes both.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go your separate ways, and you're almost each on your separate mission with your own set of challenges throughout the day. And then it
Mm-hmm.
kind of comes back to about the kid, and then she's old enough to want to be by herself a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a little bit of time, but it's sometimes spent unwinding individually from the day,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not like we are together, but we each have a phone, probably our own thoughts during a
Mm-hmm.
commercial break. And so, but you know, I keep thinking of this 50s, 90s, kind of where we are now, the
Mm-hmm.
speed up process, what things look like, what's expected is, it seemed like that 1950s model was the man went to work, the woman stayed home. But
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't really grow up then, I don't know what the marital dynamics were like or connectivity dynamics, but the world was much slower. But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our models, my parents, their models of that were their parents who were born in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents were around the 1930s, they were born. And
Mm-hmm.
so we look at these models, and we've kind of repeated, everybody's almost repeated what they've seen, I
Mm-hmm.
guess.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know about when it started to shift in, I mean, my wife and I, we were together 6 years before we got married. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of a, I said, common law thing. So, I mean, you could even tell there's a shift there,
Yeah.
in the way the world was in that
Mm-hmm.
2006 to 2012,
Mm-hmm.
and it's evolved even more now. But, when, I'm trying to kind of pinpoint when women started wanting more from men
Oh,
than to just go to work and be a provider and come home and be like their fathers and do the
well,
typical guy thing.
I think that's where it's difficult to pinpoint it because there is no one moment. It's like Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point,
Hmm.
right? Because, like, for example, women started fighting for equal rights and suffrage, like, a
A long
century
time.
ago,
Yeah.
right? And then it finally hit the tipping point where enough women wanted it that it then, became a thing, and enough people wanted it, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with civil rights, right? It's like it's not like, oh, one day, everybody was like, this is a bad idea, let's change this, right? And so I think that's part of why it's difficult to pinpoint because it's like it has to reach the critical mass before it reaches.
Me too, probably
Yeah,
propelled it
same.
forward a lot
Yeah,
because it was
yeah.
like, I guess, you know, people are always going to be that way, I guess, in a way. But there was finally a point where all these people who had this behavior of, they thought it was okay for whatever reason because they did
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
until they were actually held accountable for it. Like,
Exactly.
people were
Yeah,
like, we had enough and we expect
totally.
more. And
Yeah.
this is not how we expect, whether it's men, CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
leaders of our
Mm-hmm.
countries, to
Mm-hmm.
behave. It's not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think that was kind of a point. And
totally.
then, so it's a little like click, 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 click.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say, like, this is something that, I mean, it's what is the saying? Again, I'm just losing it with sayings today, but it's like, it's like, um, change happens very slowly and then all at once,
Yeah.
and that's really where, I mean, if you think about it, um, it's been only a very short period of time where women actually had the choice to not be in a relationship,
Yeah.
right? Because, starting even in the 50s, I mean, in the 50s, like, women were dependent on men in order to be part of society to, and then, in the 70s, like, women couldn't open credit cards. Women, couldn't just,
Yeah.
there were a lot of limitations. And the same thing with, like, civil rights is, it's like, well, sure, slavery ended. It's like, yeah, but there,
Yeah.
there was a reason why this was not like all right, let's all just be different, right? Change takes
Hmm.
time. And so I really think that probably this generation of women is really the first generation of women that do not have to be in a relationship in order to just survive in society, you know?
Yeah.
Because like even my mom's generation, like she very, didn't know that there was an option except I'm going to get married and I'm going to become a mom, you know?
Yeah.
Because there just weren't women that she could look to that were like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a career person, or, I'm going to do something else with my life. And so it's really, we've only gone like one or maybe, like one and a half, maybe generations um, of women who have had the option, and men too,
Yeah.
because again, same thing for men, right? It's like, sure, there have always been bachelors, but were they bachelors, or were they not able
Yeah.
to live their truth, which
Stay
they
at
were
home
gay,
dads.
or
Stay at
stay
home
at home
dad.
dads, right?
Yeah.
And so really, this is like a very interesting cultural tipping point of like, this is maybe the first generation where maybe the options that we all allegedly had are actually all available to us, right? And there's still stigma, right? For a man to be a stay-at-home dad, there is still
I
stigma,
was
and
a
there's not.
secretary in the Navy, but I graduated second in my class. I mean, it's not limited to women in
Sure.
typing, you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
as a joke, but sort of not, because that was in
Yeah.
the 90s. It was very different. And those were my
Mm-hmm.
strong suits. I went to UIL for typing on an IBM
Mm-hmm.
Selectric 2 typewriter, and could type 65 words a minute. So it was kind of a big deal. But
Yeah.
now my wife goes daily. I stay at home, my podcast, I Uber Eats and do some other
Mm-hmm.
odd things. But it when I talked with one gentleman about men's groups and kind of this similar topic, I think when we talk about freedom and choice, and he described that people, a family unit, can actually do what's best for the family unit.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be, whatever we thought this template or model was.
Totally.
We can make our
And
own.
yes, and we're still in the early stages of that, right? Because I hear
Mhm.
from a lot of dads where if they're the primary parent, if they're the stay at home parent, sometimes they're still fighting to be the primary contact with their school. Sometimes they're still waiting to be included on, like, hey, I need to be included on these texts. Stop including my wife, like I'm
Yeah.
the parent here. So it is still like we're not 100% there, but it is like we're on the edge of that, like a woman could potentially be president. Like, we're
Yeah.
but it is, yeah, we're right at the very beginning stages of maybe we actually do all have access to the choice. The support systems might not be there yet,
Right.
right? um, but we're working on it.
So the
Yeah.
people in, let's say, your circle and that you discuss with, their friends, and even
Mm-hmm.
you,
Mm-hmm.
what are your views on this? Are you excited about it? Do you like the
Yeah.
dynamic shifting, or does it seem like weird or out of place? Kind of giving a different cultural grow up point of view, but now
Yeah.
living in America and how dating and everything's evolved. I mean, what do you
No,
see it
I
as?
I love it because again, this has always been the appeal of America,
Does it
right? A
seem
place
like
that.
equal? Does it seem more equality?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the goal, right? Is that, like you
Hmm.
said, that a family can choose what's right for them, regardless of the configuration, and that could change, right? Maybe in the beginning, it's like if woman is just biology. She's the one that's pregnant, so she's the one that's like, maybe I want to stay home for a little bit. But then, maybe when the kid is like 6 or 7, then dad is better. He's like, I want to stay
Yeah.
home now and spend time. And like that is a possibility. And people can actually create the lives that reflect their values, that reflect what's right for them. And the economy and the society supports that, right? And it's not like you're fighting stigma every time you walk out the door as the stay-at-home dad, or you're fighting stigma every time you walk into the office as the woman. And so that's really where for me, I'm just like I'm excited when people have the opportunity, the choices, and the ability to live the lives that they want to live. You know, whatever that looks like. I'm excited about that. So yeah, I think it's a good
Hmm.
thing.
Let me see. So we talked a little bit about kind of in your book. Give us a general, so kind of a way, it's called Strong, and in the bio, it says a way forward for men and couples, revolutionizing the future of relationships. So if I were to pick up this book, what can I, was it intended for men, women, or
Yeah,
both? Or what could I like, why would I want to pick it up and what am I going to get from it?
yeah. So, strong is what I've kind of, as a therapist and then through my own journey, one thing I noticed is that, personally, I'm kind of maybe it's growing up in Japan, but I'm like, I like efficiency. I like models. I like systems.
Right.
I like plans. And so what I wanted was some kind of blueprint of that when people are like, well, what is a healthy relationship? To kind of have an easy way to say, sure, there's not one size fits all, like when it comes to who should stay at home, who should do no, none of that. I have no opinion on any of that. That's all up to you. But when it comes to the psychological foundations of a healthy relationship,
Hmm.
strong is healthy, right? And so it's an acronym that I've, basically, not only in my clinical work, but through a lot of the research that I did to write this book, of these are the 6 kind of fundamental psychological pillars of what it means to have a healthy relationship. So, if you're going to pick up this book, or let's say you're like, maybe I think my relationship's going well, but like, I think we could do better. I'm not exactly sure. Like, where do I start? Do we just go to therapy? I don't know if we're at that level. Like, is it worth it? I don't know. So there's just so much out there. So really I wanted to kind of distill it down into, you can pick it up and you can read it and you can either feel really affirmed of like, yeah, we're doing great, we've got all 6 elements, or you can be like, that's what's missing. Okay, so now if we do go to therapy, we can talk about this specific thing and ask, for help with this specific thing, because otherwise we feel pretty good about where all the other places that we're strong, right? So that was really my goal in writing this book, of like, kind of, yeah, putting a system on this very nebulous idea of a good relationship.
You're clearly rocking great taste in podcasts because you're listening to this awesome show. Did you know that I'm also part of the Podcast Connection Network? That's right, a whole network of shows dedicated to mental health and holistic wellness, just like this one. We've got something for every mood and every goal. So if you're looking to expand your horizons and explore some incredible content, check us out. The link to the Podcast Connection Network is waiting for you in the description below. Enjoy the rest of the show.
And what does strong stand for?
So the 6 essential elements of a healthy
Hmm.
relationship. So number 1 is safety. And this is where, as a woman in the world, one thing I noticed of like what women still want from men is this idea of protection, right?
Right.
So it's like the prologue of the book is talking about how men, traditionally masculine, like these masculine identity, like stereotypes, is like being the protector, being the provider, and being the procreator, right? It's like a man is physically strong, he is able to bring home the bacon, bring home a good paycheck, and he's able to, procreate, right?
Yeah.
He's always up for it, right? He's going to make a lot of babies. Um, and yet, again, like the update of the, well, what does the modern, like, does that still apply in the modern world, right? It'd be like if you showed up to work and you're like, I have a pager, and they're like, yeah, we've kind of
Yeah.
updated since then. Like, it's not the highest and best anymore. And so that's really what it is like, let's honor the masculine role of like being a protector, being a provider, being a procreator, but let's update that for the modern relationship, right? So being a protector, what are the threats to the modern relationship? Is it, marauding hordes and Vikings and, or is it something a little bit more insidious, right? Is it
Yeah.
porn? Is it workaholism? Is it alcoholism? Is it,
Somebody
loss of
sliding in their
emotional,
DMs.
exactly, loss of emotional connection? Like,
Yeah.
those are the actual threats. So if you're going to be a protector in your relationship, what are the skills you need to actually protect your relationship from the
It's almost like
threats of the
soft
modern
skills.
world? Yeah. And that's where, again, like just updating those, masculine traits to be relevant to the modern threats, right? It's
Yeah.
like if you're going to war now and somebody's like, yeah, I got my spear. It's like, yeah, it's just not, you're not going to be protecting for the right,
Yeah, I love
environment,
that. That it
right?
makes so much sense that, because we've talked about technology and upgrade and
Mm-hmm.
how that is. And, yes, there are physical threats still in the world,
Sure.
but, you know, there are so many other threats that we
Mhm.
never had in the 1950s.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and same thing with like the provider, right? It's like
Hmm.
the male provider. Does that mean he's just a paycheck, right? Which again is kind of very
Yeah,
disrespectful to men, right? It really objectifies men. And like, I mean, you've seen some of these tropes of like, you want a man in finance and he makes this
yeah,
figures and he drives a Bugatti and it's like, well, that's objectifying to men in the same way that, if a guy would say that to a woman, it would be, or whatever, you know what I
yeah.
mean? And so, like a man as a provider, also what I saw with the studies of men's mental health is like when men see themselves as financial providers, as their value to the relationship, their mental health takes a huge hit if they ever have job loss or job insecurity, and that's also because it's such a. I mean, we don't have any control over that in this economy, right? It's
No, I
like,
was laid off 9
yeah,
months into the pandemic in healthcare. And,
hmm
because you're in healthcare, I always say that you feel like it's your identity a lot. And I was crushed, and it took a lot for me to get over that,
yeah,
because caregivers, it's who we are, not just
hmm
what we do. And
hmm
once I realized that kind of really my core values are I'm kind, caring, and compassionate,
yes.
and I love to help people, I can do
Mhm,
that in many different ways. And it turned out that all the interviews and different skills I built up in corporate healthcare worked
mhm,
out for podcasting and talking to people like yourself and trying to bring
mhm,
value to people who want to listen, and
mhm,
kind of, yeah, it's changed very much. But,
mhm,
and I had to go through this of I was the working person with a master's
mhm,
degree in
mhm,
corporate, and then you're laid off, and you're kind of like, and you start to have to, both with myself, to try to tell my wife, well, like, am I being a good father? Am I being a good husband?
mhm,
Am I not just here? And there was some times I struggled with that and didn't figure out. And but also the model with, they grow up and they see that,
mhm,
her parents' model, and all of a sudden we're in a different situation.
mhm,
And then how she views it and what becomes, a point of contention for us is like, well, it's not only the paycheck. I need to be, am I providing you guys with love? Am I,
mhm,
the fact that I don't
mhm,
have this job, has it prevented us from doing X, Y, or Z, or being the family that
mhm.
we need to be? Or is it actually better because now I have more time, or I'm home more, or I'm
Yeah.
not getting 2 a.m. phone calls, or I'm not
Mhm,
doing this? And it took a while to go. And maybe that was kind of in the same process of when the rest of the world is going, wait, no, we expect more, we want more. The
mhm.
threats have changed. The meaning
Yeah.
of what it means to be a provider has changed, or what it
Mhm.
means to be the protector.
Yeah.
And, and so I feel like I went through all that firsthand and
Yeah.
experienced almost that shift, and almost had to root for the pros of a man not just being only a paycheck, not feeling that
Mhm.
way, you know?
Absolutely. And that's the thing is like obviously going through it firsthand as a man and kind of going through that yourself is very profound. And I also want to share that message so that if there are other men who are not going to necessarily go through that personally, but
Hmm.
they can also but already start to internalize like maybe I am more than just a paycheck. What else do I provide to my family, or to my community? What else, what other value do I have to provide? And it might not be something like tangible, like I can
Right.
fix things or I can build things or I can pay for things.
If
It
you're at
might
the
be
grocery
that.
store, you can help this person with their grocery bag or something. There's
Yeah,
always something. There's always someone in need.
yeah,
If you hold that to your
exactly.
core, and you,
Mhm,
because a lot of time that's what your job provides is purpose, but a purpose
mhm.
to give. And so, there's always opportunities if you look for
Absolutely,
them.
absolutely. Um, and then the procreator thing too, which is like exactly
Hmm.
what you're doing right now, is like parenting is different than just procreating, right? And that's
Yeah.
something that modern women are looking for in partners is I want somebody who's going to be invested as a parent. They're not just going to be like, well,
Not
there's your
just the
baby.
sperm donor.
Yes, exactly. Which again, men, for many generations, were very present fathers because there was nowhere else. Like, you didn't go anywhere. You
Right.
worked on your family farm. Like, you were present in the household. You were a present father all the time, and then it was really then honestly the Industrial Revolution that kind of started to really separate men as like workers. I mean, you go outside the home, you bring home paycheck, that's your value.
Right.
And then women, your place is in the home. And it's really interesting because when you look at that, that's not that's not how families have been set up for millennia. So when people are like, oh, this is nature, it's like, no, this was a very deliberate construct. And the messaging around that was actually very deliberate to kind of, because for a lot of men, again, like being an being a part of the home was integral to their masculine identity, right? They were like, of course children need a father. What? Like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like, I'm superfluous and my only value is a paycheck. Like, what? And so again, just really kind of listening to that and unlearning that. They're like, no, being a present parent as a man, as father, is crucial to child development, right? Um, yeah, and obviously, like, we can look at so many different downstream effects from absent fathers, even if the father was technically present in the home, emotionally absent fathers,
Yeah.
right? um, and so that is something, again, of like, let's go back to what, honoring the masculine of like, we're not, like, for me at least, in talking about a lot of this work, is the goal is not men were in charge, now women are in charge. Back then, the feminine was diminished and subjugated, and now it's the time for the women's rise and the men need to be subjugated
Yeah.
and like shut up and be quiet. It's like, hold on, that's just the opposite end of the same dysfunction.
Yeah.
Right? At the end of the day, we need each other to survive. We need each other to thrive. Nature is about balance. It's about, yin and yang working together. These are inextricably linked. You can't say we are only going to have summer. It's like, well, no,
Yeah.
then you get droughts in Texas and,
Mhm.
the surface of the sun. Or, so like, again, nature is
We don't
about
want
balance.
summer. We don't want 100 and something degrees that long.
Yeah, so again, just kind of really kind of going back to like, nature is always about balance, about together, about homeostasis, about, we need to figure out a way that we can all work together. Like, binaries don't exist in nature, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, just kind of bringing it back to like, these are, and so also, as a woman speaking to this message about men, sometimes I get the like, are you saying that men need to like change? I'm like, the world has changed. What
Yeah.
I'm offering is maybe some skills and tools so that you can feel empowered going into the change. That's
Yeah.
all.
I think maybe some people would be like, well, of course a woman thinks I should change. That's women have always been trying to change men, son.
Yeah.
That's kind of but that's
Yeah.
like so 1980s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, really, if you look about, women fighting for their own rights and, now they are CEOs and you have Oprah and,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of successful women. They can be anything. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's about, you know, with everything, we almost go too far, but we need to get to some balance. Like you said, it's really about nature being in balance and
Mm-hmm.
not get so far out of whack that we have no idea what we're doing. But, I'm hoping that the men that listen to this are open to it and really open, what I see it as is, hey, I mean, if it strikes a chord, then it's probably worth looking into. If it bothers you when somebody says something about it or whatever it is, then it's probably worth looking into and taking some time away and understanding what it is and why it is that bothers you. Because, really, it's about trying to become the best version of yourself so you can
Mm-hmm.
be the best father, husband,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. And part of that is listening and yeah, the same that you wouldn't want to invalidate your child's feelings. You don't want to invalidate your partner's feelings just because they're the opposite sex and you're like What I've learned in being with someone for 18 years is you come from such different backgrounds and different programs that they've seen and that were passed on by all these
Mhm.
people. And it's like, yes, it is very difficult to work around all that and to not
Mhm.
pick up patterns, and patterns clash and they're so different. But I've always kind of understood it as really you kind of need to make your own pattern. And when we talked about kind of breaking generational curses, to
Mhm.
me, it's about making a pattern that's a healthy pattern,
Absolutely.
taking two patterns that weren't necessarily perfect,
Mhm.
but trying to absolve all that or figure out where the
Mhm.
errors were and just try to improve it, amend it.
Yeah,
Just like
absolutely.
we do laws, just like we do software. And,
Mhm.
because I want our younger kids to, um,
Mhm.
be prepared for navigating these kinds of things. Because if we keep speeding up, my daughter's going to have some of the same issues.
Yeah.
Maybe, but hopefully there'll be a more informed world whenever
Mhm.
that happens. But I
Yeah,
love the way you
absolutely.
kind of tackled it by going to therapy and then
Yeah.
doing this into yourself, like from a study point of view, but it makes so much sense. But walk us through the rest of the letters. You gave us S.
Yeah. So S is safety,
Hmm.
which is very, very important. And I break safety down into four components: self-awareness, stability,
Hmm.
self-regulation, and self-expression. Right. So this is basic life skills, right? Self-awareness is for yourself, knowing
Hmm.
what you want so you can present as a safe person, being stable, having the basic life skills of stability in your life, self regulation, and self expression. And those are the communication and conflict skills that are needed to just, keep
Right.
disagreements safe and respectful. So once we get safety down, then we have trust, which is
Hmm.
obviously integral to a healthy relationship, respect, which again is something that I've heard from a lot of men specifically, of like feeling respected and feeling
Hmm.
loved are really an important part of the relationship.
Just a little bit of
um,
peace and respect. We don't
yeah,
need much more.
so safety, trust, and respect are really what I consider the like the essential elements. So those are the things that your relationship needs to survive. If you don't have safety, if you don't have trust, if you don't have respect, your relationship is going to just be in a kind of constant state of crisis, chaos, turmoil, um, because those are really disruptive factors, right? Not
Yeah.
having those. But once you get those under your belt, the ONG part of the equation is really about helping your relationship thrive and go to the next level. So O is for openness, right? Making sure that you grow together, not apart, right? And that is something, again, when people get married and they're like, all right, I love you, see you in 18 years when our kids graduate. And
Yeah.
then they wake up and they're like, oh my gosh, we grew apart, right? And
Yeah.
so openness, really emphasizing we need to continue to update each other on the changes that happen, because they are going to happen, right? We're
Yeah.
not the same person.
Yeah. You're
Um,
not, man, 18,
yeah,
it's a long time. It's a,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then N is for nurturing. And again,
Hmm.
this is my chapter where I really love getting into about the myth of the non nurturing man, and that nurturing is a soft skill that only women have. And it's like, no, men have been nurturing for generations. Like, going back to that, nurturing is essential in a relationship because it's really where that presence comes in, right? And so I talk about the difference between maintenance and nurturing. Maintenance, which a lot of men are like, yeah, yeah, I can do maintenance. It's like, well, nurturing is that next level of maintenance where it's not just keeping something running, it's keeping something thriving and alive, right? And so, you maintain your vehicle, you nurture
Right.
a plant or a child, or your relationship, which is a living thing because it dies and it doesn't get enough attention, right? And so nurturing is N, and then G is generosity, which is that kind of final, like I like to call it, like the fairy dust of the relationship
Yeah.
of, looking for little ways to make your partner's life just a tiny bit better, right? Going out of your way, just being a little bit generous, which is that essential thing that makes a relationship feel like, hey, we're two best friends that want the best for each other, right? Like I might not enjoy, I don't know, pastry, but if I see one on sale and I know that's my partner's favorite one, I'll just pick it up.
Yeah.
Doesn't cost me, and so, or driving on the side of the road, I see a thing, I'll snap a picture, or sending a meme, like
Yeah.
all of these little tiny things that you don't have to do. But when you're in that space of like, hey, I saw this and I thought of you, like just that little generosity mindset of like, I'm always looking for little tiny ways to make your life a little bit better, right? So we have safety, we have trust, we respect each other, we're open with each other, we nurture each other and our family, and also, hey hottie, hey best friend, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to have your back and make your life a little bit better. And so all of these together is really where I see like these are, again, sure, there's lots of different other, I'm not saying this is the be all end all, but
Yeah.
for myself, distilling it down into like, what have I seen in practice, in my clinical work, and then my research and my education, like the essential skills that make a relationship not just survive, but thrive for the long term.
Yeah. So what's been one of in this process, because you, like you said, journalism, and then you, through your own navigating your own relationship, you decided to study and become a therapist. And so this is kind of by taking this step, what's something that's happened that you never would have thought in a million years would have happened because you took this leap and kind of trusted your intuition?
Oh my gosh, I'm married and I've been married, and we're going on 14 years together. Because honestly, like growing up the way I grew
Uh-huh.
up and with parents, like I knew I didn't want that kind of relationship, but I didn't know what
Right.
else was out there. So I just didn't. And then when I came to America, the dating culture was so foreign that I was like, I'm not doing any of this. It's just
Right.
not. Um, so I didn't even like, I was never the little girl that dreamed of getting married or anything, just because it all seemed so like painful and overwhelming. And, I'm like,
But don't you think a lot of little girls, because I mean, I would think well, thinking of little girls want to grow up and get married and be the princess and all that, and kind of listening to hear you say, I didn't want that because it seemed painful. I guess whether or not you're looking for to be the princess, or you think it's too painful for a woman and that safety component, it could be scary either
yeah,
way,
yeah,
frightening.
absolutely. Absolutely. Which again, I would say the same thing, for men. I think there's a lot of men that maybe it doesn't
Yeah.
get talked about enough, but they all like, I've heard from so many men, they're like, I thought I would be married at this point. Like, I just thought it would happen at some point, or I thought
I
I
feel
would be
like,
a
I don't
dad.
know, as an only child, I was always comfortable being alone.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I can't pinpoint where I picked it up along the way, but somewhere in my mind, I thought it was perfectly acceptable to never be married.
Mm.
Like I'm more surprised that I'm married or and been with the same person for 18 years, because I didn't really ever want to be married. Um,
Mm.
I didn't really, maybe I did, but I didn't really think about it, or I didn't pressure it. Like to me, it wasn't like a goal. Like to me, it was more important that I be fulfilled personally with the things that I
Uh-huh.
do in my life. And
Uh-huh.
if a companion happened to be part of it, all the better.
Uh-huh.
Somebody to share it with.
Okay.
But I was never, to me, it was less important. What I did for a career and how I felt about that was
Hmm.
always more important to me.
Yes, and that is part of what I'm seeing with men now, is that that would work sometimes back in the day, because like once you got to a certain point in your career, you were a catch as a man, right?
Yeah.
But that's where I'm seeing a lot of younger men being very confused, where they're like, I thought it would just happen at some point. And now I'm like
Hmm.
hitting 35, and where's my woman? Right? Or
Yeah.
like, where's my person? I thought I would be married. I thought I would, And so that's what's also really changed, is like just being a good man doesn't necessarily make you a good partner. Right. And so a
Mm.
lot of this is that,
A good
the,
doer and a good leader are not the same thing. A lot of people in like
exactly.
healthcare, they make, you can make a good nurse, a charge nurse, but being a charge nurse and managing everyone And the whole
Mhm.
situation is way different than taking care of your three patients.
Absolutely. And I think this is part of where the evolution for men is that, like, maybe they didn't, like you said, a lot of men similarly had that same story of like, well, I just thought it would happen at some point. My job was to focus on having a good career so that when the woman came along, I was in a position to provide for her and, have a
Right.
house and whatever, whatever. But it wasn't central to like what I was looking at for my
And that's
life.
still kind of a model that's an old school model that's put on you because like, well, I need the career because I need to be able to provide XYZ because a
Mm-hmm.
woman's going to want XYZ.
Yeah, which,
Not even thinking like she might be a CEO.
yeah,
It may not even
exactly.
need what I'm providing. So
Yeah. And so that's really that shift, right? Of like,
yeah.
um, like basically what I'm seeing with men is like, especially the younger generation, is like just focusing on your career is not enough to attract a woman anymore. You also have to work on being a good partner and your relationship skills and your emotional skills, because that's what's going to keep your relationship thriving. Because again, I've seen, people that they were like, yeah, I did get married and our marriage lasted 10 years and then it fell apart. And I don't know how to sustain a long term, emotionally connected relationship. I think I'm a good person, but I'm not a very good partner. Right. And so I think
Yeah.
that's also a big, huge difference that's really becoming a lot more apparent now. Like, even like, for example, my dad was a great parent to me, right? Or at least,
Hmm.
but he wasn't a good partner to my mom, right?
Right.
And yet they stayed married for a long time because they had children together,
Yeah.
right? And so that was also part of what the setup was back then. It's like if you were a good man, like you were, not a bad man, you were a good man, and you were, a provider, and you had a good career. Like, yeah, you somebody would snatch you up, right? But now it's the game has changed a little bit or a lot bit.
And that's good. But and even if like myself with a long-term partner, even within that change, I mean, I think of like putting on weight, gaining weight and losing weight. It's like if you don't exercise, then your physical body will put on weight. You will feel
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy, you will feel worse. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
nurture your intimate relationship, emotional
Mm-hmm.
relationship, connection
Mm-hmm.
with that
Mm-hmm.
partner, that's the proverbial 20 pounds added
Yeah.
to your relationship that's
Mm-hmm.
not good for it, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And you just like that, your relationship can come to a point where, hey, you're about to have a heart attack or a stroke because your blood pressure is
Mm-hmm.
too high. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really, I think kind of with anything, it really requires what I'm learning, kind of the hard way through everything is like, I mean, everything requires a lot of deliberate work, be
Mm-hmm.
it whether it's podcasting, trying to do business and an accountability group and, you know, be a father, be a husband, um,
Mm-hmm.
have time with a wife and do things for her and let them both know I'm special and they're special and that, dissolve conflict when it arises.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot, a lot more is
Mm-hmm.
required in it. And it can be exhausting,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where you as the man have to, this is why I go to the gym. This is why I
Mm-hmm.
journal. I stay in
Mm-hmm.
touch with myself. I invest in myself. Um, because if I'm the thermostat and everybody's taking their cue from me in the family, which they do. So, it's important to me that I'm on point and
Mm-hmm.
kind of maintaining, doing the maintenance and the nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes I'll go and get a massage and do things for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it all plays a part and it kind of
Yeah.
goes into that framework, but it's a lot to keep up in the air. And I don't know that
Yeah.
I do it well yet, but over the past couple of years of kind of coming into the person I'm becoming,
Mm-hmm.
as I've changed and evolved, uh, with a lot of self-work, yeah, it takes a lot. It
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot of practice, a lot of work, but people talk about how, you hear around you from younger people how hard dating is nowadays.
Mhm.
Um, and I always say go out and be the person that you would want to meet. People have to focus on becoming the person that's going to have those qualities that a
Yeah,
woman is going to find or a partner is going to find
yeah,
attractive. That
yeah.
safety, that stability, and that
Mhm.
means your own physical maintenance, your own mental health maintenance, whether it's seeing a therapist, going to the gym,
Yeah.
doing all those things. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
it's it's wild how much work it takes. How once you realize what it takes to
Yeah,
do it at an okay level,
yeah,
if you want to enjoy it,
totally,
because the world is just
totally.
so different. It's not so cut and dry of
Yeah.
this is what you do and why you should do it. People just did it back
Hmm.
then. Now
Yeah,
there's so much more choice. You don't have to do
yes,
anything.
exactly. And I think that's also where we're seeing more people just opting out of being in relationships because they're like, if it doesn't add to my life,
Yeah,
why would I do it?
it's got to be a
Right?
value add.
Exactly.
But
And so that's
then
again,
that doesn't
yeah.
address loneliness. That's that kind of one of those things that, going back 20 years before there was the internet, Tinder, and all these
Hmm.
things, when you met people the old-fashioned way, you had to ask them out.
Hmm.
Loneliness, I don't know if it's the only child thing that I was never really that lonely, but every once in a while, maybe if I had a crush on a girl, I could long for it. That little
Hmm.
feeling you get in the pit of your stomach.
Hmm.
But I can distinctly remember at some point in time going, understanding that humans, rich, poor, whether you sleep on the street or in a jail cell or in a mansion, we all want love and to be loved.
Hmm.
And so even though, nowadays you could opt out of, you don't have to participate in relationships, because you could be a CEO and this and that, the other, and there's robots and all kinds of crazy AI stuff.
Hmm.
But, the question is it still doesn't,
Well,
it'll never fulfill whatever that human desire connection is.
sure. And I think this is where you know, people, what I see often, right, as a
Mhm.
marriage therapist, is people that are in relationships that are still lonely because they're not getting that emotional connection that they want, right, and they long for. Whereas, in the past, being married, you didn't necessarily expect to get your emotional connection needs met in your relationship, right? Because, thinking about like if a woman was like, I want to be emotionally connected, her husband wouldn't necessarily be the person that she would automatically think of, right?
No.
Um, He's like, no, that's the guy that pays the bills. Like, I'm gonna go talk to my girlfriens, right?
Yeah.
What, and so that's also something else of like, being able to be emotionally connected, whether it's to a romantic partner, whether it's cultivating friendships, right? Checking in with your buddies, having social connections in your community, feeling part of a community. All of those things are protective against the feeling of loneliness, right?
Yeah.
Simply having a partner that you live with doesn't guarantee that you're not going to feel lonely. If anything, it can be more painful to be in an emotionally disconnected relationship and still feel like I'm not feeling seen, I'm not feeling heard, I'm not feeling understood, I'm not feeling valued. And so that's where I really also always want to go back to that, like just saying, all right, everybody should pair up again, let's just all pick a
Yeah.
number, make a match, is like that's a panacea. Like that's not really addressing the deeper issue where we need to go back to prioritizing human connection, being present with each other, teaching kids emotionally connective communication styles, emotional regulation, being able to be vulnerable, ask for help, and then prioritize connection, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's you say hi to a neighbor, whether when you go to the grocery store, make eye contact. Like a lot of these things that just have kind of gone away because of the way our society is set up. Busy cities, like you can go through your whole day and never speak to somebody, never make eye
Yeah.
contact with
You can
somebody.
you can have all the people around you, but be
Hmm.
so alone all at the same time.
Absolutely. And that's honestly what I see in a lot of families now and with younger people is, and this is also where studies are showing, like the younger generation, like the Gen Alpha, they're the highest rates of depression and anxiety. And a lot of it is, when you look at their family structure, sure, they might have, two parents existing in the same house, but it doesn't feel connected. It's a collection of individuals that are existing in the same space, but there is no emotional connection. There is no feeling of togetherness. And so that's what drives loneliness, right? And
Yeah.
and so, like, again, like somebody who's desperately lonely could be, if you observe their life, they could be surrounded by people, but they don't feel connected to anyone. And so that's always what I want to go back to, is we need to go back to prioritizing the skills for connection, true deep connection, not just casual acquaintances. Because, and like obviously one of the populations I work with is, veterans and first responders. And there are so many unfortunate stories of people that, that complete suicide, or and when you look at their lives, it's like, gosh, but it seemed like, they had a lot of buddies, or, why didn't they reach out? It's like, well, at the end of the day, being able to have deeper connections all across the board, not just depending on a single person for all of your emotional needs as well, is so crucial, because we all need communities. We all need multiple levels of connection in order to survive and thrive.
Oh, and as a man, the biggest thing you have to do is speak up. We're just hard-headed, isolate, retreat, and I think a lot of it is built in shame, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kind of like go to the corner, out of the way, or we're ashamed of you, or
Mm-hmm.
you're ashamed of yourself. And so I think men, I know when I have get in the doom loop or downward spiral a little bit, the mental gymnastics is like, what you can journal, you can do everything, but like what, even though I can have a podcast, sometimes I can be so isolated and not even want to
Mm-hmm.
speak to tell my wife or
Mm-hmm.
whoever that I'm having a hard time until I process it a little bit. Um, but yeah, as a man, it's we're and the thing is each time you go through one of those, you're like, man, I should have connected sooner and
Oh
this
my
would be
gosh.
over. And I would never be, I wouldn't have, I don't care if it's 10 minutes or 10 hours
Mm-hmm.
of spending with thoughts
Mm-hmm.
of, am I enough? Would
Mm-hmm.
my family be better without me or not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Am I adding value? Just because
Mm-hmm.
I don't add the same value that I once had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and and so it's like, but it's almost like, well, you know, each time it's like just connect sooner because
100%.
you
Yeah,
will, you know,
totally.
it's crucial as a man,
Yes.
and we're hard-headed.
Yes.
And even though I talk about this on podcast and I have no
Mm-hmm.
problem speaking, there are
Mm-hmm.
times as a man that I am distraught and I have trouble speaking. And I am so,
Yeah.
each time I go, you have to be better about this, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
thing, because there's no reason to. And it's so stressful on your body. And I wear a Whoop band and you can see, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's hard, I'm not looking at it like it's the end all be all 100% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just look at some of the changes, whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
strain, your heart rate, how it's changed,
Mm-hmm.
what it's caused in your body, because I can tell you what it feels like on your
Mm-hmm.
body. It's super
Yeah.
stressful until you
Yeah.
talk to somebody, until you get it out, till you journal about it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Um, and until it's
Yeah.
processed. And, the sooner you can talk about it, then I think the
Mm-hmm.
better.
Yeah.
And men have to get better at that skill.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you want to be that kind of the protector, the provider, whatever it
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
to my wife, my daughter, to be the best
Mm-hmm.
version of myself, I have to learn to get myself out of that faster. But identifying it and knowing it
Yeah.
is a
And
starting point.
absolutely. And like you said too, it's hmm, and this is where I'm such a fan of, men's groups and men's circles and like men's community, because having that, like you said, it's difficult maybe for men to reach out, but having a curated group of men who you feel safe enough to connect with, that you know that they're going to be there for you and you're there for them, and when you reach out to each other, there's no judgment, there's only support, there's understanding, like, hey, I've been there too, and I'm glad you reached out, because honestly I was having a bad day too. And again, it's about mutual support, and that, like, you're all in this together, like
Yeah.
everybody's got the same stuff, it just happens at different times. But the not, like, really normalizing, like, especially in this world, like, life is tough, there are going to be tough times, and at the end of the day, you don't have to go through it alone. If anything, humans were not made to go through this kind of stuff alone,
Yeah.
right? And so really having those, like, I'm so glad, like, there's people like you and having these podcasts and these conversations to normalize to men. It's like, the idea of, like, the stoic man on the mountain that, like, solves everything himself and he's the great hero. It's like, these are stories, like, it's not real life.
It's
Like,
like the woman who wants the guy in finance who has the Bugatti,
yeah,
who's over
yeah,
6'5" and looks like a bodybuilder and is
yeah,
emotionally intelligent as well and can cook like a Michelin star chef.
yeah, yeah.
The percentages go down and down and
Yeah, exactly. And
down.
so, yeah, and so this is really what it is. Like, I think it's just like allowing men to be human,
Yeah,
right? It's like you cannot outrun being human, right?
no,
And accepting your humanity as not like a weakness or a failing, and like, gosh, I wish I was more robotic and more, efficient and
yeah,
if I could just work 30 hours a day, like I would be. It's like, that's not, again, what it means to be human, and that's
no,
not what, if your wife loves you and she's not just seeing you as a paycheck, what she wants is also for you to be present and be healthy. And so taking care of yourself,
yeah,
reaching out to friends, acknowledging when you need a break or you need some support, or you need a guy's trip, or you need solidarity, you need that sense of,
yeah.
I'm not alone in whatever it is I'm struggling with right now. And yes, you can talk to your wife and that's good and everything, but yeah, having a
Maybe you
community.
feel a bit of, I think maybe I was thinking about that when we were talking about it, and I'm like,
Mhm,
what's the difference? And I think, probably similar that women have shared experience, whether it's starting
mhm,
menstruation or growing
mhm,
boobs for the first time. Men have some of the same milestones or whatever. And so maybe there's less shame around it.
mhm,
Speaking to like somebody who's had that shared experience, like another man or a woman to woman you know?
mhm,
And I wonder if that's kind of where
mhm.
where men can get kind of hung up of if they only talk to their wife, if they don't have any
Yeah.
man outreach and
Mhm,
whatnot. But I think also though, in thinking that of going like, hey, your wife needs you need to nurture that. They need to be your friend, your best friend, your partner, this and that,
mhm,
that you should be able to talk to them
mhm,
just as much. And as a man, it's like I would think my wife would be like, "Hey, well, you should be able to come to me for that instead of
mhm,
this person over here. I want you to trust me that way." And I
mhm.
know as a man, sometimes it feels odd, but um, yeah, I think, I would say that that's supposed to be your ride or die. You always have their back. You would do anything for them, so they should be the same way, and you should
Mhm.
want to tell them, and you should kind of lean into it when it feels uncomfortable, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Unless it's something crazy, then,
Well,
lean into
and
most things. When it feels uncomfortable, there's a reason. Either you should progress with it or back off of it.
mhm. And this is again where it's like there's no one person in the world. I don't care
Yeah.
if it's your wife or not, that can fulfill all of your emotional needs or can hold all of them,
Yeah.
right? And so that's the other piece as well. Is like, yes, it's great that you have, like anybody. Yes, you want to strive for an open and emotionally safe relationship with your partner, so that you can tell them everything. And having other sources as well is so important, so that you're not only waiting for your partner to
Yeah.
be your only emotional outlet, which unfortunately I actually see that a lot with men, where they're like, I don't share anything with anybody, I just talk to my wife. And it's like, well,
Really?
maybe yeah, oh yeah. Where like they might have surface level relationships with friends, right, or surface level relationships with other people, but they really don't talk about anything deep or substantive unless it's with their partner. right? And so, which in some ways too is like, okay, well, I'm glad you can share some of that with your partner, but then it sometimes can become if that's your only outlet, then you become overly dependent on that, and then it starts to drive a little bit of, it can just put an unfair burden on the relationship. And so again, health is about balance, right? At the
Yeah,
end of the day.
but it's so weird because it's hard on a resonation level because connect with people for a living. And so you're always kind of looking for but there's different levels of connection.
Yeah.
When you have interviews and different things, but it's so weird to me to think that there are people out there who I'd be like almost like I think because I do Uber Eats as well, and I love it because you get to pick up from so many places. There's so many people. You might be the one smile for the day. Might be the best person they had that day, or gets them through the day. And so I think, I'm always looking for connection or, and even sometimes when I'm amiss and I'll acknowledge and be like, I should have been nicer or more open or whatever it was, I can catch myself. So I think to me, it's strange that people don't need it because I think we realize how important it is, or we're starting to understand how important connectivity is.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, but all right. Do you have any questions for me before we hop off?
No, I think it's good. I mean, here's my book.
Awesome. And I will put everything in our show notes, your link. But
Perfect.
yes, it is. And it's called Strong, a Relationship Filled Guide for Modern Men, right?
Yes.
Yes. I quite enjoyed our conversation, and I think there's a lot of value um, in that acronym, and yeah, I would
Thank
like
you.
to get a copy for sure.
Thanks.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm happy to send you a PDF if that,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would love that. Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
an avid reader.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, I'll send it to you. After we get off.
And I'll put that in the show notes and direct everybody that way. Do you have anything besides a book that you want to plug? Do you have a podcast or you
No.
can plug your practice?
Yeah, but my practice, I'm shifting from taking a lot of in-person clients to I'm going to be doing virtual. So I'm not taking new people right now. So I'll just the book is good for now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure talking with you. You're very easy to talk to.
Yeah,
And
you
yeah, I'm
too.
thrilled. I want to look at more of what you're doing. I enjoyed this quite a bit.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing for men and like providing, just another voice out there to normalize like all the things that men are dealing with in this like new frontier and this new like age of masculinity, because it's confusing for a lot of men. And so, I very much appreciate like what men like you are bringing to the conversation, because I think that's so important.
Thank you. I try. I go, hey, I know who I am and I know what I'm about. And if that, so I'm not afraid to cry or whatever it is because I know who I am and I know what I'm about and I know what I want to see in the future. For my daughter who's 10 years old. And so I'm just trying to be the person that she's going to need when she's 20 or 30. Let's see if I can keep up with all that.
Yeah.
I got to evolve at
a
high rate of speed. So, well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Asteroid.